everyone and welcome to another devlog of Solar Rogue. It's been a while since I've done one of these, but finally I have a whole bunch of things I want to show you for the update 6 that's coming for Solar Rogue. You see, I've been trying to plan my updates around major features I want to add into the game. So an update ago it was the rework of the HUD, and 2 updates ago it was the Synergy update, and this time I'm calling it the Electronic Warfare update. And the reason for that is that when I was working on the Synergy update, I was writing down a bunch of scenarios that I thought would be cool for the player to interact with, and one of these scenarios involved ships that could mess with your systems. And to do this, I thought the best way would be to have some kind of electronic warfare weapons and tools and equipment. That means stuff that can disable your ship, or maybe stop you from moving, or maybe down your shields, or, you know, things that might be really interesting for the player as a way to get an advantage on the enemy, but also things that can easily lead to yet another stupid player death. Even though I have a basic idea of what I want, it wasn't enough to just start working on it. I needed to flesh out a little bit these ideas. So I started with a big brainstorm about, what is hacking, what is electronic warfare, what do you have? I did research on, different types of weapons that the military use, or, communication arrays, and I tried to remind myself a bit of like what is computer hacking and DLL injections and stuff like that. And I made a big list of all these ideas, and I tried to come up with really precise scenarios and interaction I wanted the player to have. And I came up with like 3 ideas that I really like. The first one is the idea of a pulse weapon that could blow up around the ship and disable everything around it. So I figured it would be a really nice way for the player to use as a last resort to run away or something like that. But it's also an interesting enemy concept where maybe there's a ship that's kind of like a kamikaze and just rush you and then pulse its weapon, and then you're down for like 5 turns while his friends are hitting you with all their lasers. The second idea I had was to have a kind of boarding weapon where you could send allies inside an enemy ship and maybe, I don't know, destroy some of their components, or maybe even take over the whole ship. And I thought it could have a lot of potential, but it raises a lot of different issues that I'm not sure how to resolve, so I kind of had to table this idea for a while. The third idea was to have a kind of surgical hacking tool that could allow you to disable specific parts of a ship. And I thought it was a little bit like FTL, where you can target, for example, the enemy shields or the enemy weapons just to give you a little bit of an advantage. Once I had these kind of scenarios in my head, I could start figuring out how I'm going to implement this in the game. And one of the questions that I was asking myself, for example, is how am I going to disable, or what am I going to disable? Do I disable the whole ship? Do I disable like parts of the ships? Or do I disable items like the laser turret or the missile launcher or something like that? And if I disable like an item, does it mean you can drop it, and then if you pick it up it could be still disabled or something? But I wanted the hacking tools to be something really scary, and if you have a battleship with 5 shields and the enemy is disabling one of your shield, it doesn't matter that much. Where if he's disabling all your weapons for 3 turns, then that's a big problem. And I figured this would be more fun. So I thought maybe it's better that the weapons and the tools disable, whole system at once. Now the first system I started by implementing was the third scenario, the hacking tool, because it basically allows you to do everything I had in mind, except you get to choose what you want to do, where the other weapons might have only one feature, but they're automatic and more powerful. So, as usual, I like to start from the top, so I started by mucking out everything that I wanted to happen when you're trying to hack another ship and its subsystem from a player perspective. And the first thing I did was, okay, you fire this new weapon, what happened? Well, I want the player to be able to choose which system he's going to target, and I want each system to have different hacking chance, because otherwise why would he hack the weapon subsystem if he can just as well have as much chance to hack the whole ship and knock out the ship for a couple of turns. So I set up inside my data structure weapons that have a chance to disable with varying properties, and then I set up for each ship different resistance, so that, for example, a battleship, it's harder to disable their weapons just because they have more weapons and you assume that they're really good at keeping track of their weapons. Where, for example, a scout is supposed to be a very fast ship, so maybe his movement system is more difficult to knock down. Now, of course, I had to decide how I'm going to display this information to the player. How is he going to choose which system to hack? And for this, I already have a target choice dialogue that I can use to show a list of choices to the player for when he wants to, say, look at some items and there's multiple items. So what I did is I took this UI and I reformatted it to show a list of disabling chances with the percentage of chance of success next to each other. And now I had that. I had to figure out how all of this is going to flow inside the code. And I had some problem there because when you have multiple weapons equipped, I kind of assumed that they all happen at the same time. The way Solar Rogue is structured, it has a bunch of behavior nodes at the root of the scene tree, and what happened when the player does an action is that, for example, I collect all the information about all the weapons and where they should be shooting, and then I send this information to my damage behavior, and the damage behavior just calculates all the result and the damage and the shields and the hull and, whatever the result from shooting your weapons are. Now, with the hacking, I wanted to only display the dialogue if the player managed to hit the enemy ship. But when I do that, I'm already inside the damage behavior and I'm already calculating all the damage. But before I can keep going, I have to wait to see what the player is going to choose to hack. So I had to implement a whole system of interrupting the calculation of the damage so that the player can make a choice and then restarting the calculation of the damage from where I left off. This was not something I had planned in my original system, so it took a lot of fiddling and hacking to make it work, and I'm pretty sure I'm gonna find a whole bunch of bugs when I'm testing it. But once all of this was working, I could start working on the other weapon I wanted to implement, which is the EMP pulse. And this pulse is going to be centered around the player ship, and it's going to disable everything around it. Now, I had another interesting problem with the pulse, because if I make it very likely to disable ships, well, there's nothing stopping the player from just spamming the pulse again and again and again every turn, and then no ship is ever going to be able to shoot the player. And on the other hand, if an enemy gets in the range of the player and starts spamming the pulse, then the player is as good as dead because he's never going to have a chance to act. So I was wondering, what can I do? I could make the hacking chance really low, like 10%, but then it's not going to be very useful as a getaway if, you have only 1 in 10 chance that you're actually going to disable a ship. Plus, if you're surrounded, there's very little chance that you're going to be able to disable more than one single ship. I can already specify how many turns it takes to fire a weapon. The thing is that once you fire this weapon, the number of turns it takes to fire it, you're completely disabled. So if I make the EMP pulse take 10 turns, well, you won't be able to move for 10 turns, which doesn't really help. So I came up with the idea of a cooldown. So now the pulse has a 10-turn cooldown, which means that you can still move and do stuff, but you won't be able to fire your pulse again until the cooldown has expired. That meant not only adding new information and new code, but also adding some ways to display that the weapon is in cooldown, just like I had to add displays for when, systems are disabled on your ship or something like that. Finally, I started thinking about what kind of utilities and equipments and variation I can add on these base weapons to make them, more effective or to help the player protect against those kind of new weapons. So, for example, I added the cooled version of the pulse weapon that has a lower cooldown, and I added shielded version of many common weapons and utilities and shields that will protect you against hacking attempt. Now, where I'm struggling is with the utilities. I want to add utilities that can give you an advantage. For example, I was thinking of having antennas that you could equip on your ship to boost your hacking chances. The problem is that I'm having trouble figuring out good names for things you could mount on a ship that would, for example, protect you against hacking. I mean, a firewall is not exactly something you mount on your ship. It doesn't protect you against actual fire. So if you have any ideas of tools and equipments you could have that helps you fight off hackers or protect you against EM pulse weapons or something like that, I'd be really happy to hear about it because I'm having trouble finding good names for these tools. So let me know in the comments below. Thankfully, all of these actually require very little work to implement because I already created for the Synergy a system where I can just modify existing attributes by a couple of keywords. For example, if I put global, the name of the attribute, and at the end multiply, then my system already automatically knows that it needs to apply this modifier to this attribute in my system. And it works pretty well and it's very easy to implement. One thing I'm starting to regret is trying to make my data structure in JSON very flexible so that I could do and tweak nearly anything I want. I mean, on one hand, it's incredibly powerful and it's very versatile, but on the other hand, every time I add a ship or a weapon or an item, I have to go through hundreds of JSONs to update all the drop rates and the spawn rates and the merchant's inventory and descriptions and attributes of all the ships and all the items in the game. And honestly, it's taking a lot of time. I've been wondering if instead of having 20 levels with dozens of spawn groups and hundreds of JSONs every time I want to add a new ships to all those spawn groups, maybe I should have had like a power level and then the level generator just match power levels automatically so that I don't have to fiddle with each level every time I want to add a new ship. But I mean, I guess right now that's what I have, so I have to spend 12, 16 hours playing around in JSONs, adding all those items to drop list and merchants and all of this, but I guess that's how it is. But that's gonna be it for this week. I have to admit that as the codebase for Solar Rogue is growing bigger and bigger, adding new features takes a lot of time, and I don't want to have boring devlog with very little to show, so I've been trying to pad some of my videos with other content like tutorials, and I hope you've been liking them. I really want to come back to these devlogs, but it takes a little bit of time. You might also have noticed that ads have started showing up in my videos. That's because up till recently, I was having problems with YouTube and AdSense. They didn't want to talk to each other, but finally I managed to talk with some people at YouTube and Google, and they fixed the issue for me. So now I was able to enable all the monetization for my YouTube channel. I'm not a big fan of advertisements in YouTube channel and monetization in general, but the last time I asked, people seemed to find it totally normal and were very open at the idea of me putting advertisements in the videos. So if you find them annoying or they cut at weird places or something like that, please let me know in the comments or send me a message and I'm gonna try to fix it. I'm still quite new at this, so right now everything is enabled, but I can tweak down some stuff and play with. There's a lot of settings I can improve if there's too many advertisements and it's kind of annoying for watching the video. So let me know in the comments and I'll see what I can do. And thank you all for listening. See you all in my next video. Bye!